my usual setup, but hopefully
Good. Well, microphone and audio sound A1, so perfect.
That's what matters. It's the audio that matters, is what they tell me.
Well, so to say. Visual content is pretty important too, but we're good.
Exactly.
So look, you okay? Going to kick off?
Great, let's do it.
Okay. Welcome everybody. Great to have our second session of Startup Grind Dublin, our second session of 2021. I suppose, like everything that we do, I'm very keen to have a word from our sponsors before we get into the real meat and drink of having a chat about David. We're going to do a little introduction to David afterwards, in terms of just playing a short video, and then we're going to have a bit of a chat. Is that all right, David?
Sounds great to me.
Cool.
There's a reason why for the last 13 years, startups overwhelmingly prefer to build on top of AWS. We have the largest number of services, making it easy for you to take on some of the biggest challenges with the smallest teams. We also have partnerships with the top VCs, accelerators, and incubators around the world, making it easier to secure your next round of funding.
I'm a solution architect with the AWS Head Start program. What we do is we work with startups in the education sector, and we help them build their services on AWS.
So We Power Tech is AWS's diversity and inclusion outreach program. The program is really twofold. One is to increase the number of underrepresented technologists within the industry, and the second is to provide a platform for them to be seen and heard.
If you're wondering how the AWS Evangelism team might be able to help your startup, there are many ways. We're technically credible across our entire catalog of products, so we can help you figure out which services might be able to meaningfully impact your business. We also want to help tell your story. So if you're building something cool, we want to know about it and help spread that message to the world. So you might end up on stage at an event like AWS Summit. If you're a startup, you should also definitely check out the Aws Lofts. These are event spaces that are free to anyone with an AWS account. You can treat them like co-working spaces, but the awesome thing about them is that we also have people like technical evangelists like myself, solutions architects that come and give hands-on technical workshops and sessions to help you learn how to more effectively utilize the AWS products and platforms that you're already building on top of.
We are a dedicated team of people that love startups, that we just want to come and help you with whatever we can, whether it be technical or business focused. We are here to help guide you and make sure that you do have a say in what's going on. We do get your feedback. We do bring that feedback to the service teams. That is what we're here for.
Cool. Okay. Thank you, everybody. So look, Startup Grind, one of 600 chapters this chapter is. It's Dublin-based, but it's Dublin and Ireland-based and beyond. So there's 2 chapters across the country. We've one in Limerick and one in Dublin. Startup Grind, the ethos is really around kind of 3 pillars. And those 3 pillars are teaching, inspiring, and connecting. So what better way to do it than with our next guest, who has had, trying to think of a word to summarize it, quite a busy, hectic lifestyle. And on top of all of that, you have a 8-month-old?
Right, 8-month-old.
Okay. So sleep, how's the sleep going?
Sleep's good. So I'm in my new apartment now as well. So he's finally in his own room. So my wife and I have been sleeping better than we have in 8 months over the last couple of days.
Cool. So look, David, I'm going to give a slightly introduction about yourself, but I think it's straight and it's always better to hear it from yourself. So you've had a great career since graduating. You've founded numerous companies. Those companies have been acquired. They've been acquired with the ambition of retaining you within the business. I'm not going to, because I'm going to give away the surprise of what company acquired you. But a hint for our audience, you should be familiar with it. You're certainly going to be familiar with it after today's session. But look, why don't you tell us a little bit about your journey from kind of co-founder of CMX all the way through to VP of Community in your current organization?
Oh yeah, so started CMX about 7 years ago after, I had been working in this space for about 13 years now. My first job out of college was a community manager. So I'm a rare breed in the community industry in that this is what I've been doing my whole career, and started CMX 7 years ago to to create a community for community professionals, because as I was doing that work over many years, I started meeting more and more people who were doing that kind of work, but there was no network that really resonated with me that was like bringing people together, teaching them how to build community for businesses, valuing this work, because at that time businesses still looked at community as this very junior level, internship level, just hand it to them, they can run your forum and your social media. And so we started CMX, and it took off, because that's what happens when you create a space for a group of people who have an identity but have nowhere to express it yet. And grew it over 5 years, bootstrapped it with a small team, and then we were acquired. Am I allowed to spoil it now?
Go, spoiler alert.
So we were acquired by Bevy. So we were using Bevy before the acquisition. We were using it for our own chapters, similar to Startup Grind. We have 60 local chapters for CMX all over the world. And so we were partners and using the tool. And Derek and I, the CEO of Startup Grind and of Bevy, got to know each other pretty well, and we're supporting each other. And one day we were a bootstrapped company that needed more resources, and Bevy was starting to grow really fast and knew that they needed to build their own community. And so Derek was like, well, why would we build the same thing when you've already done an incredible job? We're already partners. We can give you a lot of the resources you need to scale up your impact. And so after a lot of really in-depth conversations, we decided to move forward with the acquisition and teamed up. And so now it's been 2 years, and that's been pretty incredible. It truly has been everything we expected and more. We have been able to grow CMX exponentially, both in terms of size, but also just like the quality and the scope of work that we can do for the industry. We've been able to scale that up really fast because of their resources, and we have an amazing team that we're working with now. And so overall, very happy with our decision. And now we're both just working together to help more businesses build and scale up their community programs.
Yeah. Cool. And look, there's loads in that, and look, there's loads of fun we're going to have over the next while, the next kind of 50 minutes or so, or 48, 49 minutes. One thing that I wanted to pick up on, and you mentioned about the journey that you went on from bootstrapping and that kind of hand-to-mouth survival piece, and it was key. The word that you labored on the most was resources, that you had resources after that acquisition, and how that change happened. How did you find that movement from being resource heavy or lacking resources to being actually able to do stuff and to do a lot of the stuff that you wanted to do?
Man, after 5 years of bootstrapping, I think CMX was a very successful community, but I can't claim that it was a very successful business before the acquisition. The truth was that we were building community in an industry that was still very nascent and didn't have a lot of buy-in. When we started CMX Summit, there were no budgets from community software companies for conferences because they didn't have a conference before that. So they didn't plan on any budget. So when we're going to conference to vendors and saying, hey, can you sponsor our event? They're like, well, I don't know. Let me see where I can scoop up budget from somewhere else, because we didn't have this planned. And it was like pulling teeth, even for community managers to get budget to go to our conference, to spend $300, $500 to go to an event. It was hard for them because they were like the most junior person in their company, and their company wasn't really giving them a whole lot of professional development funds. And so it was an uphill battle. It was not an easy industry to build a company in. And Startup Grind. I co-founded CMX with my friend Max Altschuler, who also started Sales Hacker. Like, you're selling to like sales software, there's money for that. You're selling to startups, there's money for that. Community, there wasn't money for that 7 years ago. So it was a very much an uphill battle. I funded it out of pocket, basically. I didn't take a salary for the first 2 years. We ended up using essentially debt to fund a lot of things, especially because as a conference, we're very seasonal. So we'd make all of our money around like August, like right before the event, but then we'd spend the rest of the year spending money. And so we used like a line of credit and things like that to just like even out the money and make sure we had funds. But at the end of the day, that risk was on me as well. And so it was a lot of pressure, a lot of personal risk, which I've always been comfortable with. I never felt like, you know, I don't think you become an entrepreneur unless you have like a weird relationship with risk. But it was hard, and it was getting to the point where it was probably not going to be sustainable anymore. And then the acquisition happened, and you know what, like, I mean, it just felt like a big weight was lifted off my shoulders, and I can really focus on like the impact of CMX, because overnight we went from we have to generate money with all the things we do to we actually don't need to make money on the things we do. We just need to make sure it adds up into revenue for the software product at the end of the day, because there's like no higher leverage revenue driver than selling the software product. And it felt like a weight lifted. It felt like a lot of de-risking. Frankly, we wouldn't be alive today because COVID happened after that, and our conference would have not. We would have been able to charge for tickets. We would have lost a lot of sponsorships, and I don't know that we would have survived after COVID. So, resources important.
Yeah, absolutely. But none more so than time, in terms of initially at that very early stage, and in terms of investing your time. And look, you've obviously got the rewards from it in terms of like the success that you've had, like the validation in a community or in a sector that is focused more on community. And I suppose I wanted to get back to that piece. I'm kind of bouncing around in a kind of a mad way. When did you first kind of like notice that there was the need for developing those communities and that kind of sector?
No, to build community for businesses.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it was like back in when I was in college was when I first started connecting the dots. So, like, if I go all the way back to my earliest days, you know, I was building online forums when I was 14 years old for video games, because I like struggled to find friends in real life. And
what kind of games? What kind of games are we talking?
Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 4 was my game of choice.
All the good stuff. All the good stuff. Okay.
Ooh, I played that a lot. So both my parents were immigrants. My dad was actually born in Dublin. So shout out. He was born in Dublin and then moved to England when he was like 15, and then moved to Israel after college. And that's where he met my mom. My mom's from Israel. And then they moved to the US, and I was born a year later. So I didn't have an established community in the US. We didn't have a lot of family. We didn't have any friends. So we had to like learn how to build community as a family. And for me as a young kid, like I didn't have these established roots. So I turned to video games a lot because I struggled to find friends locally. And then when that kind of opened my eyes to the value of the internet and its ability to connect us. This was back, you know, before social media was a thing. And then it was when I went to college, I was a business administration major, and I would like sit in my marketing classes where they're talking about like the traditional marketing mix and advertising and direct mail campaigns, and then I'd sit through a class on assembly line management, and I'm just like, what the fuck are we learning here? Like, this is not what businesses are going to do, not even what they're doing now. And I ended up pitching my business school on creating the first ever like social media marketing course there. And they said no. But then I pitched it to the computer science department, and the teacher, I had a good relationship with him. He's like, yeah, if you create the curriculum, let's run it. And so I helped launch the first ever like social media marketing class in the college. And so I started writing a lot, started blogging a lot about community management and online kind of social media, and how I believe businesses would all be like really leaning into this and using this as a way to connect with customers. There was a really good book called Groundswell that was published back then by Charlene Lee, that kind of spoke to this idea that a company can create this like ambassador network, this groundswell of fans and advocates, and I was like, yeah, that seems right. And And then, yeah, like I said, that led to my first job out of college was as a community manager, because a startup read my blog post and emailed me, and they're like, hey, do you want to be our community manager for the summer? We're going through an accelerator program and we need someone to run our community. So I flew to Philadelphia in 2 weeks and went through this accelerator program right after college. That was really, really, really intense. We ended up building SeatGeek, which turned into the second largest sports and concert ticket website in the world. And now and then, you know, that just kind of triggered my whole career in community and entrepreneurship. I started a couple companies after that, before starting CMX.
Cool. And it's interesting, the piece about what element or what department you pitched that course to, and the
I know,
response,
right?
and the contrasting responses in terms of a positive and a negative, and what departments they were from, and which one is seen as creative and which one is seen as more restrictive, although some of them will claim that they're creative in those sectors, not putting
Exactly.
any disclaimers in there, which has brought you kind of to your current point in terms of your current book that you've developed.
Yes. Yeah. So the business of belonging. I got one right here. We gotta get you all copies.
Yeah.
There's Derek. Derek wrote the forward for the
Cool.
book as well.
Derek, by the way, is the king of startup grind, by the way. I think that's a good title for him. I don't think he'd complain about that title at all.
I think he'd be very upset if you called him that.
Yeah. So look, I'd love you to talk a little bit about your book.
Sure.
I'd love to do a little bit of a chat. I am going to just say one kind of piece of housekeeping. If there's some questions that you have, please don't be afraid to pop them into the general. If there's Q&A, we have a couple of questions that my colleague Jen, who is struggling with unmuting her microphone, is there in the background somewhere. One of them that I can actually answer is from Scott Carroll in terms of his Boston, New England, Irish American. Does that count? Well, look, David's given a shining example of how it counts in terms of his dad from Dublin. So yeah, that's absolutely fine. We'll count that as a tick on the green box. But look, we have a couple of questions, and if people have some, please feel free to drip them in throughout the presentation. But David, if you want to talk about and kind of go through some bits and pieces about your book, I'd be love to kind of hear a little bit further about that, because I think you've a great story in terms of where it came from and how you came to kind of the culmination of writing the book.
Yeah, for sure. Do you want me to kind of share some of the frameworks from the book?
Yeah, of course.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool. So yeah, I mean, the quick background of it while I pull up my screen is that, I mean, you heard my story. I've been building community my whole career. I've been building companies my whole career. And you know, it was an uphill battle. I had 3 startups I've started with varying degrees of success. And I ran community for different companies with varying degrees of success. I got fired from one of the hottest startups in Silicon Valley after 10 months as their director of community, because it was a struggle to do this work when I started doing it. There were no guides, there were no templates, there were no frameworks, there were no communities to help you figure out how to do this. My mentors were all in marketing because there weren't people I could find that had been doing this work before me at that time. And so it was very much an uphill battle and kind of like hacking through the jungle to figure out how to do this work and how to tie it back to business value. Because like most people who do this work, I did it because I cared about community and I really liked connecting with people. And then someone told me they would pay me to do it. And I said, okay, sure, let's do that. But if you want to be able to do this work at a very high level and be able to get budget, get buy-in, build your team, be perceived as a really core part of the business, you have to be able to connect that community engagement back to business value. It can't just be like building community for the sake of community. Otherwise, it's basically going to be treated like a charity, like something for good, not for actual profit. And there's a balance there. Obviously, we're building community because we care about it, but we also want to build community that is going to help us achieve our business goals and our business objectives. So I'm going to just walk through some of our core frameworks here that I share in the book. And this is a book that I wrote to make the path easier for all of you. So for anyone who's building a startup today or building a community for your business, I hope this book gives you a really good crash course and guide and template that helps you avoid, 90% of the pitfalls that I ran into, and helps you get up to speed 10 times faster. All right. So yeah, I'll just start going through this. So I think the first big thing to think about is what does it mean for a business to invest in building community? When we talk about community, people have all sorts of different definitions for it. So I'd actually love if you could all type in the chat, what does it mean for a business to build community? How do you define a business-driven community? Not just community in general, but what does it mean to build community for a business? It could be a word, could be a phrase, could be a definition in the chat, right? And so everyone has different definitions of community because we've experienced it through our friendships in life, our family in life, our networks, our local neighborhoods, our companies that we work at. We have all these different ideas of what community means. And then we try to bring that into like a cohesive definition for business, and it can be very hard. And so, okay, great. So we have social media, right? So some companies still look at community as social media, which is a confusing thing because, frankly, I don't think community is the same as social media management. Networking, absolutely. Building relationships, belonging for sure. Creating a sense of belonging for people, collaboration, helping people collaborate with each other. Community is your customer base. That's an interesting one, right? Because a lot of people say like, well, you can't just call your customers a community if they don't feel a true sense of community. But a lot of companies will do that. They'll just say like, welcome to our community, even though you just signed up for their newsletter or something like that. Retention. Yep, absolutely. Brand loyalty and building a brand. Absolutely. So there's like all these really interesting angles on like collaboration, belonging. There's like the emotional sense of it. There's a practical like ambassador program sense of it. A very simple way that I like to explain the difference between marketing or building an audience and community is to build an audience. What you do is you help people. You create value, you entertain them, you teach them something, you do something that gives them value, you help them, and they start following you, right? And that you can be the business or you can be an individual, like an influencer or something. To build a community, you help people help each other. And it sounds very simple and subtle, but it's actually a huge difference and a big shift for businesses to make because it goes from the traditional forms of business, going back to the Industrial Revolution, where it's just like, we are going to produce products and you are going to consume them. We're going to produce marketing and messaging and you're going to consume them. You're going to come to us with support questions and we are going to answer them. And it switches it to, we are now going to look for opportunities to create platforms and spaces where you all can help each other. You can create value for each other. We're not going to create all the value. We're going to make sure that you can create value for each other. And the reason that's so important is as long as you, the business, is doing everything, creating all the value, you are limited by your resources. You're limited by your team, your bandwidth, the assets you have. And as soon as you start tapping into the community value, all of a sudden you have almost a limitless resource of creating value for people, right? And there's some really great examples of this out there. So like Duolingo is one of my favorite examples I share in the book. They've over 300 million active users, and Duolingo is a platform to learn all different languages. They have over 100 courses now. Actually, I need to update the slide. And their courses were actually developed by their community for the most part. I think they developed the first couple themselves, and then they opened it up and said, hey, if you could speak Spanish and German, you can contribute to that course. And they were able to scale up their content extremely fast by tapping into the collective knowledge of the community. And then what happened is people would take a class, and then they'd want to practice their language with other people in reality, because that's how you actually learn a language, is you practice it in conversation. You couldn't do that on the app. And so they wanted to meet up in person. Now, imagine if Duolingo wanted to organize events for people to practice their language. They had to organize it all themselves. How many events could they possibly run around the world? 20, 30, maybe 50, maybe 100 if they hired like a ton of event managers and producers and operators, but 100 maybe at most. They're running 2,600 events per month. at their peak, all by empowering their community to self-organize events for each other. Exactly how Startup Grind works, right? Imagine if the core Startup Grind team wanted to host all the events themselves, they would never be able to, right? They could never reach 600 different regions. And it's by empowering people like David that that Startup Grind has this global presence and global community. It's empowering other people to create in the community. Salesforce is a really great example. It's kind of the gold standard on the B2B side. 84% of customer questions are answered by other customers on their forums. So it's huge diversion of support costs and creates more connections between their community members. 1,000 local Trailblazer chapters, just like Startup Grind chapters. They have their own local Trailblazer chapters, over 1,000 local ones. And then Dreamforce itself, 170,000 attendees come to this conference. And they create a lot of the core experiences, but then they empower their partners and community members to create experiences as well. And so that's how they're able to scale up these programs. And so that's the idea. If you can go from we are a business, we're going to create value for everyone, and switch that mindset into we are a business, we're going to build a community of people that can create value for each other, you unlock this unprecedented scale at how you can grow your product, at how you can engage your customers, at how you can grow your customer base, how you innovate. Every part of your business can be accelerated by tapping into the community. And it's, like I said, 7 years ago, no one was bought into this. It was really hard to get any sort of budget or buy-in. In the last year, it's wild how much the community space has accelerated. This is the most recent study from First Round Capital that found that 80% of startups are investing in community, and 28% consider it to be their moat and critical to their success today. So it's becoming ubiquitous within startups. It's not a nice to have anymore. Like, every company is hiring for it. We're seeing companies starting to hire VPs of community and chief community officers. Community is becoming its own department. It's getting really large budgets. It's completely changing. In our own study, we do an annual community industry report at CMX, which you can download for free at cmxhub.com. And 86% of the companies that took that survey agreed that community is crucial to their company's mission. And we're seeing like articles like this going up, like the chief community officer is a new CMO on TechCrunch. Like, I couldn't imagine publications like TechCrunch writing articles like this back when I started doing this work. And so we're really seeing this this wide adoption, rapid adoption of community happening. And so I think it's pretty safe to say that the era of community-powered business has arrived. This is what the future of business is. It's what we've been saying at CMX for many years, and I think it's come true. That all said, while there's a lot of engagement and excitement, I want to go back to that challenge I spoke about earlier of like, you need to be able to prove the value of the work you're doing in order to be successful in business. Community teams are still struggling with that. So in our study, another stat that we found was 12% of community teams felt confident in their ability to quantify the business value of their community. So a huge challenge for businesses is still tying this kind of community engagement back to business growth. So yeah, I'm going to walk through a few of the frameworks now that I share in the book that will help you navigate this challenge and will also help you design your community engagement strategy. And then we'll make sure to take a few questions at the end here. All right. So the first framework is called the 3 levels of community strategy. So this is a framework that you can use right now as you're designing your community strategy. You want to design it with these 3 levels in mind. So you start with a business level. What is our business objective? Then you design your community programs in order to achieve that business objective. And then finally, you design the tactics that you're going to do in order to grow an ongoing community program that will achieve the business level goals. And most businesses do this backwards, right? They start with tactics. They start with a forum, a Slack group, event. They just start organizing, and then they try to figure out like, well, how does this add up into a sustainable community? And then they try to figure out, well, how does that add up into business value? And that's backwards. You want to start with an objective in mind and then design it around that. So we'll start on that business level. How do you measure the quantifiable value of community? How do you know what those objectives are? For that, we use something called the spaces model. Say hi to Space Cat, everybody. He's our loyal, trusty guide through the business outcomes of community. He's been with me for many years, very loyal. He's getting a little old, but he's still with us. And so the Spaces model is a very simple tool you can use to essentially understand what are the different objectives that we can drive a community and help you focus down. So Spaces stands for support. So support is your traditional support forums. It's where you're creating a community that helps your customers answer questions for each other. They have a problem with your product, or they have a question in their career or something like that. They can go to your support forum and get an answer to a question. P is for product. That's where you're building community. It could be like a customer advisory council, or it could be a forum where people can share their ideas and feedback and vote up each other's ideas for your product. But you're building these communities in order to help you improve your product, help you innovate, help you figure out what to prioritize in your product roadmap. A is for acquisition. So acquisition is anytime you're building a community program that is helping you acquire new customers, acquire new users. It could be ambassador programs, advocacy programs, chapter-based programs like Startup Grind and the Trailblazer chapter program. Anywhere where now you're tapping into these people who are passionate about your product and your brand, and they want to help you bring in new customers. And by the way, I share tons of examples for each one of these in the book, and we go much more into depth in each one. So this is your brief overview. Fourth is contribution. And so contribution is if you're a platform business, think of anything like collaborative consumption, like Airbnb or Lyft. Think about anything that's a marketplace like eBay or Etsy. Think about anything that's a creator platform like Twitch or YouTube. All of these are driven by contributors, which could be a seller, a streamer, a host on Airbnb. And so Airbnb has their Superhost program. Twitch has their Creator Camp program. eBay has their Power Seller program. It's focused on the contributors to the platform to make sure that they can successfully contribute to your platform. All right. E is for engagement. This is where you're driving customer engagement, right? So customer retention. By building community for your customers or for your users, you increase their retention, you increase their lifetime value, you increase their average contract value. And finally, we have success. So the last S is success. So where support is very reactive, people have questions and you want to answer those questions. Success is proactive. You have people who are using your product and you want to provide them with education on how to better use your product and how to grow in their career. The Salesforce Trailblazer program is a really great example of that, where it's all about trailblazing, helping them pave the path for their careers and become better Salesforce admins. All about helping people better use your product and grow. All right, so those are the 6 outcomes that you can drive with community. And you can kind of see it's like the different parts of your business. Community can drive many different parts of your business. All right, so thank you, Space Cat, for your service. As always, much appreciated, sir. And for each one of these, you can have a completely different set of metrics. Like, one problem is that a lot of community teams will try to do all of these at once or multiple of them at once. I'm just going to pull up this slide with all these metrics in here, and you can go ahead and just take a screenshot of this. I'm not going to go through it all in detail, but you can see every single one of the Spaces objectives has an objective. If you use OKRs, is broken down as OKRs, has an objective and has a different set of key results that you are going to track in order to measure that success. And measure the impact on the bottom line. And so, it's just important that you get really focused. All right. Take a screenshot of this if you haven't already, if you'd like to. And so it's really important to focus on one objective at a time, because each one is potentially going to have different key results. It might be a different software product. You need to run an ambassador program versus a support forum. There are different members who want to participate, right? An expert on a support forum may not want to host an event locally. It's different teams that you have to work with within your company. So there's a lot of things that you can spread yourself thin over. And it's really important to get focused and hone in on what is the core objective that's most impactful for your business that you're going to own first. Do that well, and then add another objective after that. All right. Okay, cool. Let's keep rolling to the community level. So, for the community level, we share a framework that we developed called the social identity cycle. And this essentially explains how someone becomes a member of a community. So, let's take Startup Grind, for example. Let's say you're a startup founder or you want to be a startup founder. And so that's your identity for now, right? I want to be a startup founder. What do I do? Oh, cool. I learn about this thing called Startup Grind. Someone invited me to the Dublin events, and this is my first time watching David Spinks give this talk on community. Okay, interesting. So yeah, I join and I participate in some way. Maybe at first I just like sign up, I subscribe. Maybe if it's a forum, I introduce myself and I fill out my profile, and I participate in a small way. And then the hope is, the need is that they feel validated for that participation. So that person that came to this event, did they learn something? Did they meet someone new? Did they feel welcome in the community? If they posted in the forum, did someone welcome them? Were they given the message of like, you belong here, you are one of us, we're very happy that you're here? If they get that kind of social validation and practical validation, that reinforces the identity. So now they might identify more strongly as a member of Startup Grind. They might start even adopting some of the values or the symbols or the language that the Startup Grind community uses. And that identity starts to become a part of who they are. As that happens, they participate in greater ways. Maybe they keep coming back to events. Maybe eventually they become a chapter leader. And they host events in their own region. And as they participate in greater and greater ways, they feel greater and greater validation. And that reinforces the cycle and keeps them moving. Right. And I'm actually going to skip through this one real quick. So they start to identify. I'm just being conscious of time because I want to make sure to get to your questions. You can read those frameworks I just skipped in the book. So they identify. They start to grow that identity, and then they get into that participation phase, right? So a really useful tool that you can use to design participation in your community is with a community commitment curve. And so this is the exact curve that Douglas Atkin used when he was working at Meetup, and then he went on to run community at Airbnb. But when he joined Meetup, what he found was they were losing a lot of people very early on. Like people would sign up and they wouldn't become active in their community. And when he looked at why, he realized that their onboarding basically said, welcome to Meetup, host your first Meetup. Right. So basically said like, welcome to our community, take this huge, massive action and commitment and time investment right away. When in reality, they were still very early in their experience in community. Their commitment level wasn't very high yet. And so they weren't going to be able to take that action yet, right? Like if their commitment level is down here and you're making an ask that's up here, there's a big discrepancy. And so the commitment curve essentially lets you map out what are all the actions that someone can take in your community, from filling out a profile to becoming a member to responding to a post to attending an event, all the way to being a leader, and mapping it out over this curve to give you as a team a visualization of how someone's participation may ramp up as they become more committed. And this isn't like a clear member journey. It's not like they're not going to, people can jump up and down and fall off. It's not always going to go in this order. It's more of a visualization tool for you as a community organizer to design this community experience and get an idea of how their participation will grow over time. And then what you usually want to do is when you're onboarding, you make small asks first that are easy to say yes to and build that habit of saying yes. Just fill out your profile, say hello, introduce yourself. And you want to make sure they feel validated for those small actions, and that will lead them to take greater and greater actions and move through this cycle. All right. And so, okay, so they've identified as a member of Startup Grind. They've participated by showing up to an event or introducing themselves. And they start to become a member. And finally, we have validation. So a lot of validation will be intrinsic, right? Like they just learn something, they meet someone, they care about the community and they want to give back, and they get validation from just meeting other people. But there are also things that you can do to extrinsically validate their contributions as well. And so for that, a very useful framework is from my friend Holly Firestone at Venify, called the SNAP framework. A very simple way of mapping out the different kinds of ways you can reward your community members. So SNAP stands for status. So think about any time you can give someone a badge, anytime you could give them a role within the community, anytime you can give them like a membership in something like the Yelp Elite. uh, Yelp has their elite status that you can reach, or the Airbnb Superhost. These are all rewards of status that improves, that it's like a representation of their status in their community, or their status in their external community, in their career. It could be like certifications. It could be like Reddit karma. So all these different ways of showing status for someone's contribution. Then we have networking. So networking is like giving people access to exclusive events or experiences, like inviting them to a private dinner. I know like the Startup Grind chapter leaders all get invited to Startup Grind Global and get to participate in some exclusive experiences there. So that's a great reward for chapter leaders who are putting in so much time into running their events. Access is the third one. And so this is like access to maybe your CEO, to your product team. Your community members want to feel like they have influence over the direction of your business and your product. And so giving them access to the right people helps them feel like they have that influence. And then finally, perks, everyone's favorite swag, gifts, benefits, sports tickets, concert tickets, socks, t-shirts, hats, other things that we'll all just throw out, but sometimes we really like because they're comfy and we wear them as pajamas. So all these are 4 different buckets that you can use to brainstorm different ways you can reward your community, right? And so in the workshops we'll teach, you'll actually design this out, design your social identity for your community, map out your participation experience for your community members along the commitment curve, and then brainstorm. Just write down a couple ideas for each area of the SNAP framework for ways that you can reward your community members. All right. And then finally, that brings us to the tactical level. There's a couple full chapters on the in the weeds little tips and tricks and little things that I've learned over 13 years of doing this work professionally that I share in the book. But I just want to leave you with 5 of the key things that I think are really important for building a community. So number 1, do things that don't scale, especially when you're starting out. The temptation is like, well, I'm going to launch this forum with 1,000 people and I'm going to automate the onboarding and welcome messages and automate introductions, all that stuff. Don't automate too early. Do things hands-on that don't scale, because you have a very great opportunity to start small in the beginning and be very hands-on. The same way when you start a startup, you want to be very focused and very hands-on, because that does 2 things. 1, it helps you learn. 2, it helps you build relationships with the people that are your early adopters, or in a community, it's your founding members, and you build a foundation of community, right? Like Nextdoor is a platform for neighbors to connect with each other in the US. They're in 90% of neighborhoods today. Wild. But they started in one neighborhood. And when they started, they literally went knocking door to door on people's homes to invite them to join the platform. So do things that don't scale. Number 2 is stay consistent. If you launch a community, you better be in there showing up every morning with a new post, responding to people, welcoming people. If you're going to, do like a weekly rituals, like we in our community will do a Monday morning welcome for all of our new members. We'll do once a month, we'll do a jobs thread. Every Friday, we might do like a Friday fun day, playful game kind of thing. So having these kind of repetitive rituals create habits for people. If you're doing meetups, do it on the first Tuesday of every month, so they always know there's going to be an event on the first Tuesday. They never have to guess when the next event is. All right. 3, don't fear the crickets. We're all just afraid that we're going to throw our birthday party and no one's going to show up, and we're going to have balloons and it's going to be really sad. It's rooted into us as humans since childhood. Just accept that it's part of the journey of building community. Is you're going to post things that no one responds to. You're going to have events with low turnouts. That's okay. You're looking for community market fit the same way you're looking for product market fit. It's all an experiment. Put it out there, be confident. If it doesn't work, make a joke about it. My friend David Niall, another Irishman, wrote a book called How to Talk Funny. Highly recommend it. It teaches you how to like create funny content and speak funny. And he taught himself how to be a stand-up comedian. And one thing he says is like, you know, whenever a joke flops, you don't just like let it be dead air. You make a follow-up joke like, oh, well, my mom thought that was really funny. And that just like breaks the ice and like makes everyone laugh, and it gets you going. So even in community, if I post and no one responds, I'll say like Bueller, you know, if you ever seen Ferris Bueller's Day Off, you know, if you don't get the joke, then you just feel out of the loop. um, or you know, just make a joke, keep moving on, don't fear the crickets. Number 4 is invest in diversity, equity, and inclusion from day one. This is really important. You can't build community without it having an impact on DEI, without having an impact on who feels like they belong and who doesn't, because you are creating a new social structure. You're creating a new social space. And if you aren't intentional about who you invite and how you're inclusive in that space, then you are doomed to perpetuate what's already happening in society, which I hope we all understand now is not equitable, right? And so if you want it to be a place that's safe and welcoming to marginalized groups and people of color or people who just aren't representative in your industry, then you have to be intentional about that and do it from day one, because you know, if you don't start with that, it's going to be much harder to add later, right? If you have a community that's 99% white people and then you want to invite people of color into it, and you're at 100 members already, it's going to be much harder to do that than if you did it when you were at 10 members, right? And so so invest in diversity, equity, inclusion from day one. And I think this is really important because as community builders, we actually have the ability to make improvements to these issues. And finally, default to transparency. It's like one of my rules with business and community. It's just like, if I make a mistake, I'll own it in the community. If I don't know something, I'll ask the community. If we put out a survey, we just did a big survey of the CMX community and we got some negative feedback in there, we're going to share that out and let the community know, like, here's what you had to say, here were the results. That transparency builds trust, and trust is a foundation of community. If you're not transparent, then you miss a really, really great opportunity to build community. All right. So that's your crash course in business strategy and designing your community. And like I said, the book is much, much, much more in depth, but it's not too long. You can see it's not a long read, but it's packed. My friend Andrew Warner, who runs a Mixergy podcast, which is an awesome podcast for startups, he said it's a textbook that's fun to read. That's how he described it. And he doesn't like a lot of business books. So I hope you pick it up. I hope you enjoy it. And I hope it makes the path 10 times easier for all of you.
Perfect. Cheers, Dave. I might get you to send drop a link in the end. If you want to, just in terms of the book or whatever, we can send it around at the end anyway to people afterwards.
Awesome. Yeah. Let's we can drop the Amazon link. Or actually, no, let me send you my
there we go. Jen has it up.
Website.
We have it up on
Perfect.
Perfect. Can I ask a quick question and a cheeky one?
Absolutely.
Have you approached your alma mater to run some sort of a module in terms of community? And no doubt with the infinite success that you've had since graduation, they've been more positive.
I haven't really, you know, I think I've tried to get in touch a couple times with the business department just to be like, hey, I'm in town. If you know, if you'd like me to come chat with the students, but they haven't made it easy. It's a small liberal arts college. It's like no one knows it. So if I was more proactive about it, I'm sure I have connected with like the alumni community here in San Francisco and been involved with that. So yeah,
cool.
They should let me come back. I don't know. It's in upstate New York though. I don't make my way back up there very often.
Okay, cool.
Virtually, we can do it virtual now that everything's virtual.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I actually just, as you were chatting, I went and looked at job postings for community managers, and a lot of it is actually like, obviously there's been an explosion in that over the last while.
Yeah.
And that's because as we've migrated to an online kind of world, and I think Brian kind of has a question about that in terms of, I don't know if you can see it here, it's how do we manage people in the community that are not overly active, and how do we re-engage those people without obviously being annoying?
I think Brian's question is actually they're very active to the point that they're they're overly
Sorry,
active
apologies.
without
Yeah,
adding any value.
yeah,
Yeah, I know those. It's tough. Those I've had those in our community as well. Honestly, the best thing you can do is have a conversation with that person and see if you can channel their energy in a more productive way. The fact that they are that active is a good thing. It's bringing energy into the space, but sometimes it could be a language barrier. Sometimes it's just like they don't quite get the social cues that other people get. You have no idea what background they have or how they're coming into the space. So I always just try to get on a call with those people, and I'm not getting on the call to say like, "Hey, you're posting too much." Like, you need to stop doing that. I get on a call to say like, hey, I just want to like thank you for being so active and get to know you a bit. And I get on the phone with them and say like, cool. So like, what makes you so passionate about this community? What's important to you? What do you want to get out of it? And hear from them. And then I figure out what I can like kind of offer as recommendations and say like, oh, well, like, yeah, I noticed you've been posting a lot. Actually, I think one thing that would help you get more quality responses from people is if you adjust how you ask your questions in this way, or when you answer someone's question, I've noticed that you just answer it with a very quick response. We really want to try to get people to do more in-depth responses here that are well researched. So do you think you could help with that? And so I try to like just kind of shepherd them in the way of a positive contributor.
cool. Can I ask just kind of a future prediction in terms of communities and where you see them going as we readjust? And obviously, you guys in the States, as we were chatting, are a little bit further down in terms of vaccinations and bits and pieces like that as well. What do you see as that hybrid model, or how is that going to look going
For
forward?
events?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's I don't think hybrid events are going to be a big thing, if I'm being honest.
Okay.
I mean, I've done it before. I ran community for Le Web, which was the biggest tech conference in Europe for some time, based in Paris. And we had thousands and thousands of people there, and we're running a really, really high quality live stream. I was managing all of the online participants, and it's very expensive. It's a lot of work, and there's always a disconnect between the people who are there in person and they're online, because no one in person wants to network with people online. They want to network with the people there in person, and no one online wants to see 100 posts about where people are going to get lunch or what after party they're going to or where they're meeting up for networking. So I think it will happen, especially for companies that just want to like expand the reach of their in-person events. But I think more likely than not, what it's going to look like is we'll have both. I think we're going to have a lot back to like really great in-person events. And I think we're going to have a lot more dedicated virtual events than we had before COVID, because now businesses have been kind of their eyes opened to the value of virtual events, in that they're very accessible, they're a lot more affordable, easier to run, a lot less logistics.
Cool. I'm just going through the Q&A really quickly here just to see if
Maybe we could do rapid fire. I do have to jump on the hour, so let's do rapid fire. Let's bang them out.
Scott Carroll, historically, community building has been an afterthought and an add-on. I'm building a new startup where our platform has community as one of our product's 3 core values. Any suggestions or bear traps to be aware of when building community into the product from day one?
No, I mean, I think that's great. I think more companies should be building it from day one rather than adding it later. I think an opportunity you have is to tap into like their general interest rather than the product interest, because when you're a brand new startup, it's probable that no one really cares about your product yet, but they care about what your product represents or your mission or like the larger category that you're working in, right? Like HubSpot has the inbound community that's focused on all inbound marketers, right? It's not just a HubSpot product. So just think about how you can build community around what their actual interests and passions are right now, rather than forcing them to only interact around your product itself.
Cool. Okay.
And start small. Don't go too big. Start small.
Very interesting one. And look, obviously, last question, we'll wrap on this. I was curious, just the piece that stuck out for me was you were saying about don't build in something that's scalable and cold. It's kind of it's removed from people because it's automated, so to speak. Just like a little bit of just a kind of a word on that, and how you'd iterate based on that, because obviously you're going to be getting a lot of feedback from that face-to-face or non-scalable interaction.
Yeah. So, like, look, if you're starting a community, you want it to be 1 million people one day. Don't start trying to go for 1 million. Start with, like, how do I get the right 10 people, the right founding members, people who are very smart and engaged, not like the most popular people because they won't have time. It's like the up and comers are usually good founding members, and get them in a room together. It could be a video call. You don't have to have a Slack or forum or anything yet. Just like get them talking to each other in a curated, intentional way. And then it can grow from there, because next time you could say, hey, all of you invite one person that you think should be part of this group. Now it goes from 10 to 20, 20 to 40, 40 to 80, 80 to 160. And that's how communities grow. They exponentially grow. They don't grow linearly. So that's how it becomes really huge, but you can still start very small. And then what your goal is to push out control as far as possible. So you're going to grow it to 100, 150 people, but then it's going to get a little big. So that's when you start looking for opportunities. Is there someone who's really engaged that I can put in a moderator position or an event manager position, and constantly just be distributing leadership to the members of your community? That's how you'll scale, and that's how you'll be able to manage a community of millions of people.
Cool. Well, look, on that's a brilliant finish, David. Thank you very much. I'm going to give you a round of applause. And I'm going to tell those that are in the audience that to keep an eye on Startup Grind Dublin. So startupgrind.com/Dublin for future events. We will be launching a number of events and our schedule between now and the end of the year. But David, thank you very much. Enjoyable and insightful as always. And I wish you the best of luck.
Very much appreciated. Thanks for having me. I'll be back in Ireland soon. We just visited, and it's like one of my favorite places in the world. So I will be back.
Cool. We'll catch you soon. Take it easy.
All right.
Bye. Bye-bye.